From the very first second, I want you to imagine something so strange and so quiet that it almost feels like a dream. A man sitting alone on a late-night bus, his head resting against the window, the city lights passing like slow-burning memories he cannot escape. That man is Keanu Reeves, and on this night he is thinking about a woman he has known for decades, a woman who once changed the course of his life without even trying. Her name is Sandra Bullock. But the part almost nobody knows, the part he never planned to talk about, begins on a night like this one, when everything he thought he understood about kindness, loyalty, and silent heartbreak would be tested in ways he never expected. Keanu has always been known as the quiet one, the gentle one, the man who never wants to be the center of attention even though the world keeps pushing him there. But on this bus ride, he is not thinking about fame or movies or red carpets. He is thinking about a moment from many years ago, something that still lives inside him like a warm ember that never burned out. He remembers the first time he met Sandra during the filming of a movie that would change both of their lives, even if neither of them knew it at the time. He remembers her smile, the way she laughed at her own mistakes, and the strange sense of calm he felt just by standing next to her, as if she could turn every stressful moment into something soft, something easy to carry. But before we get there, before we dive into the truth he has been holding on to for so long, you need to understand something important. This story is not about romance in the usual sense. It is not about dramatic confessions or movie-like declarations of love. It is about respect, humility, kindness, and the quiet resilience that grows inside two people who have seen their share of pain. It is about the moments that never made it into interviews or headlines. It is about the choices they made when the cameras were off. And it all starts with a single unexpected event that left Keanu standing on a dark road many years before he met Sandra, with nothing but a heavy silence and the fear that his life might never be the same again. He had been driving home late after a long day, exhausted and distracted, thinking about the pressure of becoming someone the public wanted him to be. The road was empty except for the whisper of wind slipping across the pavement. Then, without warning, a small dog ran out from the trees on the side of the road. Keanu swerved to avoid it, and the car skidded, spinning twice before sliding into a ditch with a harsh crunch. The impact was not deadly, but it was jarring enough to leave him dazed, gripping the steering wheel with shaking hands as he tried to understand what had just happened. The engine hissed, a slow release of heat and frustration, and in the distance he could still see the dog watching him with frightened eyes. Keanu climbed out of the car, his legs trembling, his breath short. He checked himself for injuries, relieved to find only a few bruises and a racing heartbeat that refused to slow down. He looked around for help, but the road was empty. The night was heavy and cold, pressing into his skin. He sat down on a rock near the ditch, trying to collect his thoughts. He felt foolish. He felt alone. But more than that, he felt something shift inside him, something quiet and important. He realized how fragile everything was. One moment he was driving home, thinking about little things, and in the next moment he had been inches away from losing everything. He reached for his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. He laughed quietly to himself, a tired, shaky sound. He leaned back and closed his eyes, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sound of the dog running away. And in that moment he made a promise to himself. He promised that if life was going to give him more time, he would use that time differently. He would be gentler, kinder, more aware of the people around him. He would listen more and speak less. He would try to understand what others carried, even when they never said it out loud. He did not know it then, but this promise would shape every part of his relationship with Sandra. It would become the quiet foundation of their connection, a connection filled with small moments of honesty that the world never saw. When help finally arrived, Keanu felt strangely calm, almost grateful. He was safe. He was alive, and he felt changed, though he could not explain how. Years would pass before he understood the full meaning of that night. But he carried the memory with him, a silent reminder that life could shift in an instant. And it was this sense of fragility that stayed with him when he walked onto the set of the movie where he and Sandra first met. The morning had been chaotic. Crew members rushed around with equipment, shouting instructions and adjusting lights. Keanu arrived early, as he always did, preferring to avoid the noise and find a quiet corner where he could breathe. He had expected the day to be ordinary, filled with lines to memorize and scenes to shoot. But the moment he saw Sandra for the first time, something inside him paused. Not romantically, not dramatically, but deeply. She was sitting on a folding chair with her hair tied back, reading her script with a look of concentration mixed with gentle curiosity. There was something calm and real about her, something untouched by the industry's sharp edges. She looked up and smiled at him, a warm, easy smile that made everything feel lighter. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Sandra." Keanu nodded and returned the smile. "I'm Keanu." She laughed. "I know who you are." And just like that, something simple yet powerful was created between them. It was not love at first sight, not in the romantic sense, but it was respect at first sight. Two people who had been through enough in life to understand the value of gentleness when they saw it. As filming began, they found themselves drawn to the quiet moments between takes. Sometimes they sat together without speaking, just sharing the silence. Sometimes they joked about their mistakes, laughing in a way that loosened the tension in their shoulders. And sometimes, when the world around them felt too loud, they looked at each other with a silent understanding that they were both trying their best to navigate lives filled with pressure, expectations, and a constant search for balance. One day, after a long and exhausting shoot, Sandra accidentally spilled her coffee all over her costume. She stood frozen, staring down at the dark stain spreading across her shirt, her cheeks turning pink as crew members rushed over to help. Keanu watched for a moment, then stepped forward with a small smile. "I'll spill mine too if it makes you feel better," he said softly. Sandra blinked in surprise, then burst into laughter. The crew paused, unsure how to respond. And then, without any hesitation, Keanu tilted his cup and let a few drops fall onto his own shirt. It was a small gesture, almost silly, but it was filled with kindness. Sandra looked at him with a gentle warmth, the kind of warmth that stays with a person for years. In the following weeks, their bond deepened. They shared stories about their families, their fears, their dreams, the things that kept them awake at night. They talked about loss, about the weight of the past, and about the strange responsibility of being seen by millions of people who would never truly know them. Sandra told him about the pressure she felt to always smile, to be approachable, even when she was tired or hurting. Keanu told her about the promise he had made on that dark road years ago, the promise to live with more patience and kindness. But there was one conversation they never had, one silence that grew heavier each day. Both of them knew they cared for each other deeply, more deeply than they said out loud. But both were afraid of crossing a line that could ruin the gentle balance they had created. They respected each other too much to risk hurting one another. They were both carrying their own quiet wounds, scars that made them cautious. And so, they let the unspoken truth sit between them, warm but untouched. One afternoon, during a break between scenes, Sandra found Keanu sitting on a bench behind the set, looking out over the water. The sky was pale blue, and the air was still, holding the moment in a kind of fragile perfection. "You ever think about how strange all this is?" she asked, sitting beside him. He nodded. "Every day." She leaned back and closed her eyes. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living two lives, the life everyone sees and the life I actually feel." Keanu looked at her quietly. "Which one do you like more?" She opened her eyes slowly. "The one I feel, it's harder, but it's real." Keanu nodded again. "Yeah, the real parts matter more." They sat in silence again, a silence filled with more meaning than any script could capture. But the peace did not last. A tension began to grow on set, something subtle and strange. A rumor spread about a rewrite of the final scene, something that could change the emotional tone of the movie. Directors argued behind closed doors. Producers paced back and forth, whispering urgently. And slowly, both Keanu and Sandra began to sense that something important was happening, something that would force them to confront feelings they had been trying to ignore. Late one evening, after most of the crew had left, Sandra found Keanu alone again, this time sitting on the floor of the soundstage, flipping through pages of the new script. He looked troubled, his brows furrowed in a way she had rarely seen. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. He handed her the script without saying a word. She skimmed it quickly, her eyes widening as she reached the final scene. "They can't do this," she whispered. "It changes everything." Keanu nodded. "I know." She looked at him, her heart pounding. "If we film it this way, people will think." He finished the sentence for her. "That something is going on between us." Sandra swallowed hard, "But nothing is." Keanu nodded again, but this time he hesitated. "Yeah, nothing is." She looked away, unsure why his words suddenly felt heavy. The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken fear and unspoken truth. Finally, she whispered, "Keanu, do you think we should talk about something?" He looked at her gently, but with a seriousness she had never seen in his eyes before. "Yeah," he said softly, "I think we finally have to." and before she could say another word, the door to the soundstage creaked open behind them. They both turned, startled, as a figure stepped inside, casting a long shadow across the floor. That shadow was about to change everything, and neither of them was ready for what came next. The shadow in the doorway did not move at first. It just stood there, tall and motionless, as if the figure behind it was deciding whether to step out of the darkness or step back into it. Keanu and Sandra looked at each other, a silent flash of worry passing between them. The soundstage was already dim, lit only by a few overhead bulbs that buzzed quietly like restless insects. The echo of the door closing behind the figure made the air feel even heavier, as if the entire room was holding its breath. At last, the person stepped forward, and the dim light revealed the familiar face of the assistant director, a man named Ron who rarely showed emotion but always seemed aware of everything happening on set. His expression was unreadable, a strange blend of curiosity, concern, and something else that neither Keanu nor Sandra could quite understand. He walked slowly toward them, his footsteps soft but steady, until he stopped a few feet away. "Sorry," he said in a low voice. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Keanu closed the script gently, his fingers brushing the cover as if trying to hide whatever truth the pages held. "It's fine," he replied calmly. "We were just talking." Ron nodded, but his eyes lingered on both of them a little too long, as if he had walked in expecting something else, something he was now trying to piece together. He finally sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I know the rewrite came as a surprise. I know it changes things, but the studio wants it. They think it'll make the ending more emotional, more memorable." Sandra crossed her arms, not in anger but in worry. "But it changes the meaning," she said softly. "It makes the audience see something between us that isn't really there." Ron hesitated, then gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe, but you two have this connection, even off camera. It's something people will feel whether you want them to or not." The room went quiet. Neither Keanu nor Sandra responded. They simply let the words settle between them, like dust in the beams of light above their heads. Ron seemed to realize he had stepped too close to a truth they weren't ready to touch. He cleared his throat. "Anyway, I just wanted to make sure you both saw the new script. They'll want to rehearse it tomorrow morning. Get some rest." He turned to leave, but then paused at the door. Without looking back, he added quietly, "Sometimes the things we don't plan are the things people remember the most." Then he stepped out, letting the door close behind him with a soft thud. When the echoes faded, the silence returned, heavier than before. Sandra let out a shaky breath. "He's right," she said. "People will assume things." Keanu looked down at the script in his hands. "Yeah, but maybe that's not the real problem." She turned to him slowly. "Then what is?" He lifted his eyes to hers, and for a moment they simply stared at each other, the truth sitting between them like a fragile glass they were both afraid to touch. "The problem," he said quietly, "is that I don't want people to misunderstand something that I haven't even figured out myself." She swallowed hard. "Keanu, what are you saying?" He opened his mouth to answer, but the words didn't come. Instead, he looked away, as if searching for courage in the shadows around them. Sandra watched him, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She had always admired his calmness, his patience, his quiet strength. But now she saw a different version of him, uncertain, vulnerable, torn between honesty and fear. Finally, he whispered, "I don't want to lose what we already have." Sandra felt her breath catch. "You won't." "I might," he replied gently. "If we cross a line we can't uncross." She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "Maybe we're not crossing anything. Maybe we're just being honest." He gave a small smile, sad and warm at the same time. "Honesty is harder than people think." The soundstage lights flickered softly, as if encouraging them to speak the rest. But neither of them continued. Instead, they sat in the heavy quiet, both lost in thoughts they weren't ready to share. Finally, it was Sandra who stood. "We should go," she said softly. "It's late." Keanu nodded and rose too. They walked side by side toward the exit, their steps slow, almost reluctant. When they reached the door, Sandra paused with her hand on the handle. "Keanu," she whispered, "whatever happens tomorrow, remember that I care about you. A lot." He nodded gently, meeting her eyes. "And I care about you too." She smiled softly, but there was something sad in the curve of her lips, as if she already knew that caring would not be enough to protect them from what was coming. When they stepped outside, the night air wrapped around them like a cool blanket. The set that had been full of noise hours before was now quiet, lit only by a few flickering street lamps. A soft breeze rustled the nearby trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and dust. "Do you need a ride?" Sandra asked. Keanu shook his head with a small smile. "I brought my bike, but thank you." She nodded, though she looked like she wanted to say more. Instead, she simply stepped forward and hugged him, gently, carefully, as if unsure whether she had the right to hold him too tightly. He hugged her back, and for a moment the world felt still. Then she pulled away with a soft laugh. "See you in the morning." "Yeah," he whispered, "morning." They walked in opposite directions, Keanu toward the parking area and Sandra toward her car. But neither of them felt ready to leave the moment behind. As Keanu reached his motorcycle, he paused, staring at the handlebars for several seconds. He felt something tugging inside him, something familiar yet painful. He remembered the promise he had made on that dark road years before, to live with kindness, to be gentle, to protect the people he cared about. And now, standing here under the dim lights, he wondered if keeping that promise meant staying silent or finally speaking the truth. He swung one leg over the bike and rested his hands on the grips. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The night was calm, but the storm inside him was. Meanwhile, Sandra sat in her car with her hands on the steering wheel, staring at the windshield without turning the engine on. She felt a kind of ache in her chest, not sharp but heavy, like a quiet sadness that didn't have a name yet. She had always valued the ease of her friendship with Keanu, the natural way they fit together without effort. But the rewrite of the final scene had forced her to see something she had been avoiding. She cared about him in a way that scared her. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and sighed. "This can get messy," she whispered to herself. "So messy." But even as she said it, she knew something else too, something she hadn't admitted until now. She didn't want to run from the mess, not anymore. The next morning, the set buzzed with energy again. The crew moved quickly, adjusting lights and positioning cameras. There was a kind of nervous excitement in the air, the kind that comes when people know they're working on something big, something that might leave a mark. Sandra arrived first. She walked onto the set with a smile, but inside she felt uneasy, her thoughts tangled like threads she couldn't untie. She greeted the crew, joked with the makeup team, and tried to keep her heart steady. Keanu arrived a few minutes later. When Sandra saw him, she felt a familiar warmth, but she also noticed something different in his expression, a tension, a quiet seriousness that wasn't usually there. He walked over to her, his steps slow, his shoulders slightly tense. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, forcing a smile. They stood there for a moment, both waiting for the other to say something meaningful, something brave. But the words stayed trapped inside them. Before either could speak, Ron appeared beside them with the script in his hands. "We're ready to rehearse the new ending," he said. "Let me walk you through the changes." They followed him to the center of the set, where a small crowd had gathered. The director, 2 producers, and several crew members were waiting. The mood was serious, almost heavy. Ron cleared his throat. "The new ending adds an emotional layer. The studio thinks the audience will respond strongly to it. It's subtle but powerful." The director nodded and handed each of them a revised page. "Read it first," he said, "then we'll run it." Keanu and Sandra opened the pages. Their eyes moved across the lines, their breath sinking unintentionally as they read. The scene described a moment of vulnerability between their characters, a soft, lingering closeness that looked almost like a confession, the kind that would make any viewer wonder what was happening behind the eyes of the actors. Sandra felt her pulse pick up. "This is a lot," she murmured. Keanu nodded silently. The director stepped forward. "I know it might feel like it hits close to home. That's why it'll work. Real emotions make powerful scenes." Their shoulders stiffened slightly at the same time. It was not lost on them how much weight the director's words carried. They took their positions for the rehearsal. Sandra felt her heart pounding as she faced Keanu. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, soft, cautious, filled with something he was trying to hide. "Action," the director called out. The scene unfolded in a quiet, intimate way. Their characters talked about everything they had lost, everything they feared, everything they wished they could say. The lines were simple, but the emotion behind them felt raw. And when it came time for the final moment, the moment that changed everything, Sandra stepped closer to Keanu, her breath shaky. Their characters were supposed to stand inches apart, their eyes locked, both of them wanting to say something but not daring to. It was almost a confession scene, except the words never came. The audience would feel the intensity, the ache, the longing. But what the script didn't say, what the script couldn't say, was how much of that ache was real. Keanu's voice was soft. Sometimes the hardest thing is knowing what you want and being too afraid to reach for it. Sandra felt her chest tighten. She replied, and sometimes the hardest thing is knowing someone else feels the same, but neither of you says it. The set went silent. The director leaned forward. Crew members paused. Something electric filled the space around them. "Cut," the director whispered, almost breathless. "That was incredible." Keanu and Sandra stepped back slightly, both of them trying to catch their breath. They avoided each other's eyes, afraid of what they would see. The director approached them with a grin. "That's the energy I want, real, vulnerable, honest. Whatever you two are doing, keep doing it." But neither of them was smiling. After the rehearsal ended, Sandra walked quickly toward her trailer, her thoughts spinning. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her hands shaking. What was she doing? What were they both doing? She didn't have time to answer before someone knocked on the door. She froze. The knock came again, gentle but firm. She swallowed hard, then opened the door slowly. Keanu stood there. His expression was heavy, his eyes searching hers with quiet desperation. "We need to talk," he said softly. Before she could reply, he stepped inside. When Keanu stepped into Sandra's trailer, the air changed. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, like the way a room grows warmer when sunlight shifts across the window. But the moment the door clicked shut behind him, something deeper moved between them. It was the kind of silence that doesn't belong to strangers or even ordinary friends. It was the kind of silence that grows only between two people who have been carrying unspoken truths for too long. Sandra stood near the small table by the window, her fingers gripping the edge as if she needed something steady to hold on to. Keanu stayed near the door for a moment, unsure if he should move closer or keep his distance. His eyes rested on her with a gentle seriousness, the same quiet look he had worn during the rehearsal, the look that made her heart beat in strange ways. "I didn't mean to barge in," he said softly. I didn't want more time to pass without talking." She nodded, though her voice didn't come yet. She wasn't afraid of him, not even a little, but she was afraid of what the truth might do, how it might change the one connection that had always felt safe. Keanu took a cautious step forward. "Sandra, I don't know where to start." She swallowed hard, finally lifting her eyes to meet his. "Maybe start with why your voice sounded like it was going to break during the scene." He let out a quiet breath, "Because it felt real." Her lips parted slightly. "Real how?" He hesitated, caught between fear and honesty. "I wasn't just acting, and I think you weren't either." The words hung in the air like a fragile bridge between them. Sandra looked away, her heart hammering. "Keanu, we can't let this get out of control. We can't confuse feelings from a script with real life." He shook his head gently. "That's not what this is. I know the difference, and I think you do too." She turned back toward him, her expression soft but conflicted. "You're right. I do know the difference, and that's why I'm scared." He stepped closer, slow and careful. "Why?" She breathed out shakily. "Because I care about you. More than I planned to, more than I ever said. And if something goes wrong, if anything gets complicated, I don't want to lose what we already have." Keanu's eyes softened with something warm and painful at the same time. "That's exactly how I feel." For a moment, neither of them looked away. It was as if the entire world had narrowed down to this one small room, this one fragile connection, this one truth they could no longer avoid. Sandra sank down onto the sofa, gently pulling her hands together in her lap. "We should have talked about this sooner," she whispered. Keanu sat across from her, close enough to feel her warmth but not close enough to touch. "We weren't ready," he said. "Maybe we still are." She nodded, "But now we have to be." There was a small, trembling pause. "Keanu," she whispered, "when did you first know?" He smiled softly, almost embarrassed. "It wasn't one moment. It was 100 little ones, like the way you laugh when you're nervous, the way you look down before you answer a serious question, the way you care about everyone around you even when you're exhausted. It all added up." Her eyes glistened, not with tears but with a softness that was almost more overwhelming. "I didn't know you noticed all that." "I notice everything about you," he said, and he meant it. She looked down at her hands again. I don't know if I can handle this. He leaned forward slightly. We don't have to make any decisions right now. We just needed to tell the truth. She nodded, wiping a hand over her face as if trying to clear her thoughts. The truth is, I don't want this to hurt you. You've been through enough. I don't want to add anything heavy to your life. Keanu's expression softened. You don't hurt me, you make my life lighter. She gave a tiny laugh that broke into a trembling breath. You say things like that, and it makes everything harder. I'm not trying to make it harder, he whispered. I'm trying to make it real. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt warm, swollen with emotion and unspoken understanding. Then Sandra pushed herself up slowly, pacing across the room. We have to think about the movie, the crew, the attention, if people even suspect something between us. They'll talk, Keanu finished. I know. And the studio will pressure us, she added. I know. And the media. I know, he repeated softly. She turned toward him, her eyes full of fear and longing. So what do we do? Keanu stood slowly, his voice steady. We keep being honest, with ourselves, with each other. Nothing else has to change today. She looked at him for a long moment, the weight of everything they had said settling into her shoulders. Then she walked toward him, stopping just inches away. Can I ask you something? She whispered. Anything. If the world wasn't watching, if none of this pressure existed, would you want something more? He didn't even hesitate. Yes. Her breath caught, her chest tightening. And if the world is watching? This time he paused, not because he doubted his answer, but because he understood the cost of speaking it aloud. Finally he whispered, I'd still say yes, but I'd be more afraid. She gave a small, fragile smile. Me too. They stood there, still inches apart, both of them quietly trembling from the weight of the moment. Then suddenly, a knock sounded on the door. Both of them flinched. The knock was firm, quick, and repeated twice more before either of them could move. Sandra wiped her hands on her shirt and stepped back. Keanu instinctively moved away from her too, both of them terrified of how things might look if someone walked in. Just a second, Sandra called, her voice a little too high. She opened the door slowly. Ron stood outside again, holding a clipboard and wearing a tired frown. Sorry to interrupt, he said, though his eyes flickered with something that suggested he already suspected more than he should. They want to run the final scene again. The studio wants to watch a live feed this time. Sandra felt her stomach twist. Already? Ron nodded. They're pushing harder than usual, something about wanting to capture the raw emotion while it's still fresh. She knew what that meant. They had seen the rehearsal footage. They had seen something real in her eyes, something real in Keanu's, and they wanted more. Keanu stepped closer to the door. We'll be there in a few minutes. Ron nodded again, but before leaving he added quietly, Whatever's going on, be careful. People are paying attention now. The door closed behind him. Sandra leaned against the wall, her breath unsteady. They're noticing. Keanu's jaw tightened. Of course they are. We can't let this ruin everything, she whispered. I won't let it, he said firmly. She met his eyes again, and for the first time since he entered the trailer, she felt something strong rise inside her. Not fear, but determination. Then let's get through this scene, she said, and whatever comes next, we'll figure it out. He nodded slowly, together. She breathed out carefully, yeah, together. They walked out of the trailer side by side, but kept a respectful distance between them on the way to set. Not because they wanted distance, but because they were afraid of anyone reading too much into the closeness they weren't ready to explain. When they stepped onto the soundstage, dozens of eyes turned toward them. Cameras had been set up at extra angles, monitors glowed. The producers whispered urgently to each other. The director looked both excited and anxious. All right, he said loudly, clapping his hands. We're doing the final scene again. This time the studio is watching, no pressure. The crew chuckled nervously. Sandra's heart pounded. Keanu felt the muscles in his shoulders tighten. They took their marks, the lights shifted. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the equipment. Ready, the director asked. Keanu looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at Keanu. They both nodded. Action. They moved through the scene with a kind of raw honesty that surprised even them. Every line felt heavier, every pause more meaningful. Their characters spoke about fear, about trust, about the quiet bravery it takes to care for someone when the world is full of chaos and noise. And then came the moment, the same moment that had made everyone hold their breath the first time. The emotional near confession. Sandra stepped closer to Keanu, their faces inches apart, their breathing shallow. She looked into his eyes, and he felt the entire world disappear around them. She whispered her next line, her voice shaking with real emotion. Sometimes the truth is too heavy to say out loud. Keanu responded softly, and sometimes it's heavier to keep inside. Their eyes locked. The director leaned forward in his chair. The crew froze. Every monitor lit up their faces. And then Sandra did something she had not done in rehearsals. She reached out. Her hand touched Keanu's cheek, just lightly, barely a whisper of contact, but enough to send shockwaves through both of them. The entire set held its breath. Keanu swallowed hard, his voice nearly breaking as he delivered his final line. Maybe the truth is easier when you don't have to carry it alone. The director, stunned, whispered, "Cut." But no one moved. No one spoke. No one even breathed. Then from behind the monitors, one of the producers abruptly stood, his face serious, his voice sharp. "We need to talk," he said loudly. "Both of you now." Keanu and Sandra froze where they stood. Something was wrong. Something big. And as they followed him toward the private meeting room behind the set, both of them felt the same sinking dread in their chests. Whatever they were about to hear, it could change everything. The producer's voice had been sharp, almost too sharp, and the way his eyes pressed into them as he said, "We need to talk now," left both Keanu and Sandra with a slow, cold ache in their stomachs. They exchanged a quick glance, one filled with worry, confusion, and the faint trembling of something unspoken that neither of them had the strength to face yet. Then they followed him across the set, stepping around cables, lights, and whispered murmurs that rippled through the crew like a quiet storm. The private meeting room behind the set was small, windowless, and bathed in a dim yellow glow that made everything inside feel more serious than it needed to be. Once the door closed, the noise of the set vanished, replaced by a thick silence that settled across the three of them like dust on old furniture. The producer, his name was Mark, took a seat at the table. He didn't gesture for them to sit, but after a moment of tense uncertainty, they did anyway. Sandra sat with her hands folded tightly together, her fingers knotted in anxious tension. Keanu sat more still, palms flat against his knees, a steady but guarded calm resting in his eyes. Mark inhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair. "All right," he said slowly, "I'm going to be direct." Sandra braced herself. Keanu's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Mark placed his hands on the table. The studio saw the feed. Sandra nodded quietly, though she felt something twist inside her chest. Keanu waited, expression unreadable. "They're excited," Mark continued. "Very excited. They think the emotional weight in that version of the scene is exactly what the movie needs. Raw, intimate, real. They haven't stopped talking about it since." Sandra blinked. "So that's good." Mark exhaled slowly. "It's good for the movie, but it might not be good for you too." A quiet fear pressed through the room. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" Mark's eyes softened, and for the first time since they walked in, he looked less like a producer and more like a human being caught in the middle of something delicate. "Look, I've been doing this for a long time. I know when on-screen chemistry is just acting, and I know when it's something else. And what you two just did up there, that wasn't acting." Sandra felt her throat constrict. "We were focused," she said quickly, though even she didn't sound convinced. Mark shook his head. "No, it was more than that. It was the kind of moment that gets studios excited and tabloids drooling." He paused. "They want to use it." Keanu stiffened. "Use it how?" Mark leaned forward. "They want to push a narrative, a story about the two of you, a romance story, maybe not official but hinted, teased, suggested. They think it'll boost publicity, sell tickets, get attention." Sandra's breath caught. "But that's not fair." "No," Mark agreed. "It is, but it's how the industry works, especially when two people connect like you just did." Keanu shook his head, his voice low and steady. "We're not doing that." Mark gave him a tired look. "You might not have a choice. They want interviews, press tour, behind-the-scenes footage. They want to frame the movie around your chemistry, and they already think something is happening between you. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment, but nothing is happening. And the painful part was how untrue that felt now. Keanu looked at her with gentle sadness, and she felt her stomach twist again. Mark noticed the look between them and sighed. I'm not blaming you, I'm warning you. The media will run with this whether you want them to or not, and if you're not careful, they'll twist it into something that hurts both of you. Keanu's voice softened. So what exactly are you saying? Mark rubbed his temples. I'm saying you need to decide how you want to handle this. The studio will push for more emotional scenes. They'll push for marketing that focuses on the two of you. But if you give them too much real emotion, things will get out of control. Sandra felt a tightness in her chest. What do we do? Mark looked at them with tired sincerity. Protect yourselves, set boundaries. Don't let the industry turn your personal connection, whatever it is, into a product. Keanu nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the words. After a long silence, Mark stood. I'm on your side, I just don't want to see either of you get hurt. He paused at the door, his voice gentler. Be careful, both of you. When he left, the room fell silent again. Keanu let out a slow breath. This is getting complicated. Sandra leaned forward, pressing her hands to her forehead. They're watching every little thing we do, every look, every gesture. I know, Keanu said softly. She glanced at him, and we didn't exactly help by doing what we did in the scene. Keanu looked down. I didn't plan to react like that. Me neither, she whispered. Another silence fell, but this one felt heavier, charged with something they could no longer pretend wasn't there. Keanu, she said softly, did I cross a line when I touched your cheek? He shook his head immediately. No, you didn't cross anything, you did what felt real. That's what scares me, she replied. He looked at her with quiet vulnerability. Me too. She felt her eyes sting unexpectedly, and she quickly blinked the feeling away. Why does it feel like we're standing on a tightrope? Because we are, he answered gently, and we don't have a net. She leaned back against the chair, her heart aching. I don't want to lose you. Keanu's voice was barely a whisper. You won't. But even as he said it, neither of them felt reassured. After a long, heavy moment, Sandra stood. We should get back. If we stay in here too long, people will talk. Keanu nodded slowly. You're right. They left the room quietly, stepping back into the bright, chaotic noise of the set. But everything felt different now. Every pair of eyes seemed sharper. Every passing glance felt heavier. Rumor had a way of lighting up the air like electricity, and they could feel the charge building all around them. They finished the day's scenes with a quiet professionalism that surprised the crew. Though they still moved with the same natural rhythm, the same ease, there was a new weight resting beneath the surface, something only they could feel. A quiet understanding that whatever bond they shared now had eyes on it from every direction. When filming wrapped for the day, Sandra gathered her things quickly. She felt emotionally drained, and she needed space, not from Keanu, but from the pressure around them. She walked toward the parking lot with her head slightly lowered and her thoughts swirling. But just before she reached her car, she heard footsteps behind her. Sandra. She turned. Keanu stood under the dim street lamp, his expression full of gentle concern. Are you okay? She forced a small smile. Yeah, just tired. He stepped closer, his voice soft. I know you're overwhelmed. We both are, she corrected. He nodded. Yeah, we are. There was a long pause, and then Sandra said quietly, maybe we should keep a little distance during filming, at least for a while, just to take the pressure off. Keanu froze, not angrily, not hurtfully, but with a kind of silent ache. Distance. She swallowed hard. Just a little, it doesn't mean I don't care, it just means we need space to think. He stood still for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If that's what you need. She looked down at her feet. I think it's what we both need. Keanu's voice was gentle. I don't want space from you, but I'll give you whatever helps you feel safe. Her eyes softened painfully. Thank you. He gave a small nod, then stepped back. Get home safe. You too, she whispered. She watched him walk away. The distance between them was just a few steps, but inside her chest it felt like miles. The days that followed were strange. On set, they acted their scenes with professionalism, grounded emotion, and a kind of quiet restraint that almost hurt to witness. Their connection didn't vanish. If anything, it stayed alive beneath the surface, flickering quietly like a candle hidden in cupped hands. But they stopped seeking each other out between takes, stopped sharing small jokes, stopped sitting together during lunch. Everything felt careful. The crew noticed. They whispered about the shift in energy. They wondered if something had happened behind the scenes. The director watched them with a mix of pride in their performances and confusion about their sudden emotional distance. Sandra tried to convince herself that distance was the right choice. But each day, each scene, each quiet moment where she caught Keanu's eyes from across the set and looked away too quickly, it chipped at something inside her. Keanu felt it too. The silence began to feel colder, heavier, like he had stepped back from a warm fire and wasn't sure how to get close again without getting burned. Then one Friday afternoon, everything changed. They had just finished filming a long, emotional scene, and the crew was buzzing with energy. Sandra stepped away to grab some water, and Keanu started walking toward the far end of the soundstage where Ron was waving him over. But before he reached Ron, someone else intercepted him. A man he didn't recognize, professionally dressed, serious face, a badge clipped to his pocket. "Mr. Reeves," the man said quietly. Keanu frowned. "Yeah." "I need to speak with you privately," the man said. "Now." Keanu paused, glancing toward Sandra in the distance. She was laughing with a makeup artist, unaware of the sudden shift happening behind her. "What's this about?" Keanu asked. The man lowered his voice. "It's regarding Ms. Bullock." Keanu's stomach tightened instantly. The man added, "And something that happened off-set, something the studio has just been made aware of." Keanu stepped closer, his voice low and tense. "What do you mean, what happened?" The man glanced around the room, then leaned in. "Someone filed a report," he whispered, "and it involves you and her." Keanu's heart dropped. But before he could ask another question, Sandra turned and saw the two of them talking. And the look on her face shifted from curiosity to confusion, to fear, and she began walking toward them. Her steps quick, her eyes sharp, her breath shallow. Whatever was about to happen, whatever this man was here to say, it was about to drag both of them into a storm they weren't ready for. Sandra hurried across the soundstage, her footsteps sharp against the concrete floor as she moved toward Keanu and the man standing with him. She did not know who he was, but the look on his face, the stiff seriousness, the quiet urgency, made her heart tighten before she even reached them. Keanu turned slightly as she approached, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen directed at her before: fear. The man straightened as Sandra stopped beside them, her breath slightly quickened from the speed of her walk. "Ms. Bullock," he said, giving a brief nod as if this were some kind of formal meeting. "Thank you for coming over." Sandra narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small card, and held it toward her. She didn't take it. She only glanced at it long enough to see the studio logo and his name, Michael Cooper, Compliance and Risk Management. She didn't need to know more. His presence alone told her exactly what kind of trouble was unfolding around them. "What is this about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Michael glanced between them. "I was instructed to speak with Mr. Reeves first, but since you've joined us, we can address it together." Keanu stepped protectively a little closer to her, though he did not touch her. His voice was low. "Address what?" Michael looked down at his folder. "The studio received an anonymous report this morning, a concern, a complaint, involving you and Ms. Bullock." Sandra felt a chill travel through her. "A complaint?" she asked slowly. "About what?" Michael hesitated, which only made the silence heavier. "The allegation claims that the personal relationship between the two of you is interfering with production, that boundaries are being crossed, and that it is creating an unsafe or uncomfortable environment for certain staff members." Sandra blinked hard, completely thrown. "Unsafe, uncomfortable, what are you talking about?" "That's exactly why I'm here," Michael replied calmly. "To investigate." Keanu shook his head, anger rising in the quiet way he carried it, controlled, focused, but unmistakably strong. "We've done nothing inappropriate." Michael raised a hand. "I'm not here to accuse, just to gather information." But the studio takes these matters seriously, and given the emotional intensity of your recent scenes, the timing of the report, well. Sandra felt heat rise to her face, not anger but humiliation. "Someone is watching us," she whispered, more to herself than to either man. "People always watch," Keanu said softly, his eyes fixed on Michael. "But this is wrong." Michael sighed. "Look, these investigations usually go nowhere. 90% of the time, it's someone misinterpreting something they saw, a moment taken out of context. But the studio requires that we look into it. I need to ask each of you some questions privately. After that, I'll interview a few staff members. If everything checks out, this will be handled quietly and closed within a few days." Sandra's pulse pounded loudly in her ears. "This could damage our reputations," she murmured, "even if it's false." Keanu's voice deepened with a protective edge. "No one here is going to damage her name." Michael kept his posture neutral. "The best thing you can do is cooperate fully. Transparency is how these things get resolved." But Sandra's mind was already spinning. Who would file something like this? Why now? Was someone on set trying to manipulate them? Or worse, trying to hurt them? She tried to keep her breathing steady. "Fine," she said quietly. "Ask your questions." Michael held up a hand. "One at a time, I'll need to speak with you separately." Keanu stiffened. "There's no need for secrecy." "It's protocol, Mr. Reeves." Keanu opened his mouth as if to argue, but Sandra gently placed a hand on his arm, not gripping, just resting. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'll go first." He looked at her, worry filling his expression, but after a long moment he nodded. Michael led Sandra toward a small, empty office near the back of the soundstage. As the door closed behind them, Keanu remained standing where he was, fists subtly clenched, every muscle in his body tight with frustration. He hated this. Hated the way she had to walk into that room alone. Hated that someone, a stranger, was about to ask her invasive questions about feelings she was still trying to understand. And while Keanu waited, the set around him continued its usual rhythm. But nothing felt normal now. Every glance felt suspicious. Every whisper sounded like gossip. He could feel eyes on him, even if they weren't actually there. Ron approached carefully. "You okay?" Keanu didn't look at him. "Someone filed a false report." Ron exhaled. "I heard." "Did you?" Keanu asked, turning to face him fully now. Ron stayed calm. "Word travels fast on set, but I didn't hear details." Keanu studied him for a long moment, trying to see if there was any hint of guilt or dishonesty in his face. But Ron looked genuinely concerned. "This is going to create problems," Ron said quietly. "It shouldn't," Keanu replied. "We didn't do anything." "That doesn't always matter," Ron muttered. Meanwhile, inside the small office, Sandra sat across from Michael, her shoulders tense, her breath shallow. The room felt too still, too bright, too focused on her. Michael sat down, opened his folder, and spoke with the careful, practiced tone of someone who had done this many times before. "Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Bullock. I want to remind you that you are not in trouble. This is simply a standard procedure to clarify the facts." She nodded stiffly. "I understand." "First," he began, "is there any personal or romantic relationship between you and Mr. Reeves that the studio should be aware of?" Her heart lurched. The question was simple, maybe even expected, but it hit a tender place she wasn't prepared to open. "We're close," she said honestly but gently. "We're friends with a lot of trust and respect between us, but we're not involved." Michael made a small note. "Have you ever behaved in a way on set that you believe could have been misinterpreted by others?" Sandra hesitated. Images flashed through her mind. The near-confession scene. Her hand on Keanu's cheek. The way they looked at each other. The silence that lingered too long. She swallowed, maybe emotionally, but not physically, nothing inappropriate. Michael nodded. "Have you ever seen Mr. Reeves act in a way that made anyone uncomfortable?" "Never," Sandra replied before he even finished the question. "He's one of the most respectful people I've ever worked with." Michael continued his list, each question poking at shadows Sandra wished would disappear. Every answer felt like walking through fog, uncertain, exposed, vulnerable. Not because she had anything to hide, but because the truth itself was fragile. After nearly 20 minutes, Michael closed his folder. "Thank you. I'll speak with Mr. Reeves now." Sandra left the room feeling drained. When she stepped back onto the stage, Keanu was waiting for her, his eyes scanning her face immediately. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though she looked tired. "Just answer honestly, you always do." He touched her arm gently, only for a second, only enough to reassure her, before he followed Michael into the office. Inside, the atmosphere shifted again. Keanu sat with steady posture, shoulders squared, eyes calm but sharp. Michael cleared his throat. "I'll ask you the same questions." "Go ahead," Keanu said. "Are you in a relationship with Ms. Bullock?" "No," Keanu answered, "but I care about her a lot." Michael paused. "Does she know that?" "Yes." Michael wrote something down. "Did you two act in any way that might be considered inappropriate or unprofessional on set?" Keanu shook his head. "No, nothing like that." Michael leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Reeves, I have to ask this carefully. The emotional intensity between you two, especially in the most recent scenes, is it entirely acting?" Keanu hesitated. "Only for a second." But that second was enough. "It's honest emotion," he said quietly, "but that doesn't make it unprofessional." Michael watched him for a long moment. Then he closed his folder. "Thank you, you've both been cooperative. I'll conduct a few additional interviews. We should have this settled soon." Keanu stood and left the room. Sandra was waiting near the corner of the stage, her arms folded lightly, her expression filled with quiet worry. He walked toward her slowly, and when he reached her, he nodded once. "It's done." She let out a breath she had been holding. Good. But neither of them felt relieved. Because something still didn't add up. Who would file something like that? And why now? They sat together on a nearby bench out of the crew's way, speaking softly. "Someone wants to cause trouble," Sandra said. Keanu nodded. "Or someone saw something and misunderstood." "Or someone didn't misunderstand at all," she whispered, looking away. Keanu's brow tightened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before answering. "I mean, maybe someone noticed how we look at each other." Keanu exhaled slowly. "That's not their business." "I know," she said, "but it doesn't stop people from noticing." Another silence settled between them, thick with the weight of truths neither of them fully understood. Then Ron hurried over to them, looking strangely tense. "Hey, I just heard something," he said, lowering his voice. "What?" Sandra asked. Ron looked around, then leaned closer. "Someone on the crew said they overheard a conversation earlier, someone talking about filing a complaint to control the situation." Keanu stepped forward. "Who?" Ron shook his head. "I don't know, I'm trying to find out, but there's more." "More?" Sandra echoed. Ron nodded. "They said the complaint wasn't really about something you did. It was about something someone else wanted to avoid." Keanu frowned deeply. "Avoid what?" Ron swallowed hard. "Attention, specifically attention on something that was happening behind the scenes." Sandra felt a cold breeze of fear sweep through her chest. "Ron, what are you talking about?" Ron took a breath, looked at them both, and said quietly, "The complaint might not have been about you two at all. It might have been a distraction." Keanu shook his head. "A distraction from what?" Ron hesitated. Then he said the words that made both of their stomachs drop. "Someone on the production team might be hiding something, and they used you and Sandra to divert attention." Sandra stared at him, her voice barely audible. "Do you know who?" Ron shook his head slowly. "Not yet, but someone does." Before Keanu or Sandra could respond, a sudden commotion erupted on the far end of the set. Several people rushed toward the equipment area. Voices rose, sharp and urgent. Sandra stood. "What's going on?" Ron's face went pale. "I don't know." Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand instinctively as they hurried toward the noise. And when they reached the crowd, someone stepped back, revealing a shattered monitor on the ground and a small envelope taped to the broken frame. On the envelope, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 words. "Stop digging or else." Sandra's breath hitched. Keanu's grip tightened around her hand, and everything around them fell into a stunned, horror-filled silence, the truth that finds the light. No one moved at first. The soundstage had gone completely silent except for the faint buzz of the overhead lights. A broken monitor lay on the floor, its screen fractured into sharp, glittering pieces that reflected the worried faces crowding around it. And taped to the shattered frame was the small, trembling message. "Stop digging or else." Sandra felt her heart twist painfully, her breath catching in her throat. Keanu stood beside her, his expression tightening with a calm, controlled intensity that always showed up when he felt protective, or when he sensed a threat. Ron bent down slowly, carefully peeling the small envelope off the broken frame. He held it with 2 fingers as if it were something dangerous or fragile. "This wasn't here 10 minutes ago," he whispered. Keanu glanced around, scanning every face, every shadow, every doorway. Someone wanted us to see it. Sandra swallowed hard. Someone is trying to scare us. Or silence us, Ron added. Keanu stepped forward, gently taking the envelope from Ron. He opened it carefully, but there was no letter inside, no explanation, no signature, nothing except the threat written on the outside. "They want us to stop asking questions," Keanu said quietly. Sandra crossed her arms, trying to steady her breathing. "But we weren't asking questions. We didn't even know what to ask yet." Ron nodded. "And that's exactly why this is worrying. Someone thinks you're too close to figuring something out." Sandra felt a soft chill run down her spine. "But we weren't investigating. We were just trying to get through a false complaint." The realization hit all 3 of them at the same time. The report wasn't the threat. It was the cover. Someone needed the studio focused on something else, something easy to control, something dramatic, something about 2 famous actors who didn't know how much attention they were catching simply by caring about each other. And now, the moment someone whispered about a distraction, the threat appeared. Keanu took Sandra's hand, not dramatically, not romantically, but firmly and protectively. "We're not going to let someone use us to hide something." She squeezed his hand gently. "I agree." Ron glanced over his shoulder nervously. "We should go somewhere private." They moved quickly to a quiet hallway behind the dressing rooms, a narrow space with dim lights and old posters taped to the walls. Keanu positioned himself so that he and Sandra were standing against the wall while Ron stood opposite them. "Someone filed a complaint," Ron began, keeping his voice low. "Not because they cared about the 2 of you, but because they needed the studio distracted, and now they're warning us not to look deeper." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Do you think this is about money, production issues, something illegal?" Ron hesitated. "I don't know, but the crew doesn't break monitors and leave threats for no reason. Someone is scared or desperate." Sandra's stomach twisted. "And they involved us because you 2 created the perfect storm without even meaning to," Ron said softly. "The studio was already watching you closely. Your connection, your scenes, your chemistry, that made you the perfect distraction." Sandra put a hand to her forehead. "This feels unreal." Keanu touched her arm gently. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, just overwhelmed. Ron continued. "I think someone on this production is hiding something big, something that could shut down the movie if it gets out." Keanu turned his head slightly, listening. "So someone is using fear, threats, breaking things." Ron nodded. "Exactly." Sandra looked between them, her voice soft. "But what can we do?" Ron hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Nothing, not yet. Don't investigate, don't ask questions, not until I figure out who's behind this." Keanu stepped toward him, his tone gentle but strong. "Ron, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you're putting yourself in danger by getting involved." Ron gave a small, weary smile. "This job always has danger, and I'd rather take the risk than watch you 2 get dragged into a mess that has nothing to do with you." Sandra touched Ron's arm in gratitude. "Thank you, but please be careful." Ron nodded, then slipped away down the hallway, leaving Keanu and Sandra standing alone. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension, the fear, the exhaustion, all of it pressed against them like a heavy fog. Finally, Sandra whispered, "I hate this." Keanu nodded. "I know." "We were just trying to figure out our feelings," she said softly. "We weren't trying to start anything." "I know," he repeated gently. She leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. How did everything get so complicated so fast? Keanu looked at her with a quiet sadness. "Maybe because we matter to each other." Her eyes opened, locking onto his. "And maybe," he added softly, People can see that even when we try to hide it. She let out a shaky breath. But what happens now? What if the studio starts treating us differently? What if the media finds out? What if this ruins everything? Keanu stepped closer, his eyes warm and steady. I won't let anything ruin you. She swallowed. I'm not worried about just me, I'm worried about you too. He brushed a stray piece of hair behind her ear, not intimate, just tender, steady, grounding. We'll face whatever comes together. Her voice trembled. I'm scared. He nodded, me too, but we don't have to pretend we are. She leaned into him. Not a kiss, not anything romantic, just her forehead resting against his chest, needing the stability he carried so naturally, so gently. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her with quiet strength. The world felt heavy, but his hold felt safe. After a few long moments, Sandra pulled away slightly and looked up at him. Keanu, can I ask you something? Always. If none of this chaos was happening, if we were just two people working on a movie, would you want something more? Or am I imagining everything between us? Keanu lifted her chin gently with 2 fingers, his eyes soft and warm with honesty. You're not imagining anything. Her breath hitched. I want more, he whispered. I always have, even when I was afraid to admit it, even when I thought it might make things harder. Her heart ached in a way that felt both painful and beautiful. But he continued gently, I don't want to chase more if it puts you in danger, or if it makes you unhappy. Your safety matters more than anything to me. She blinked away tears. You always think about everyone else first. I made a promise to myself, he whispered. A long time ago, on a night when I thought I might lose everything. I promised I would try to be gentle with the people who mattered, and you matter more than you know. Her voice broke into a soft whisper. You matter too. He smiled, a small, quiet, fragile smile. Then we protect each other. Before she could respond, Ron suddenly appeared at the far end of the hallway again, this time running. Keanu, Sandra, he shouted, waving his arms. Come here. They rushed toward him. When they reached him, they saw the panic in his eyes. What happened? Sandra asked. Ron caught his breath. Someone broke into the editing bay. Keanu stiffened. What? The computers, Ron said, voice shaking. The footage, the security cameras, everything was tampered with. Sandra felt her stomach drop. Why would someone? Ron shook his head. I don't know, but the important thing is they didn't take anything from the editing bay. Keanu frowned. Then what did they take? Ron swallowed hard. And then he said the words that made Sandra's knees almost buckle beneath her. They took the footage of your final scene, the emotional one, the one the studio loved. Keanu's breath hitched. Why that scene? Ron looked between them slowly, the truth settling into his expression like a shadow. Because that scene is the one that first made the studio pay close attention to you, and someone doesn't want that attention on the production. They want it on you. Sandra felt cold fear flood her chest. They want us to look guilty. Ron nodded. And they want the studio looking at you instead of whatever they're hiding. Keanu's voice deepened. So they're using the emotional tension between us to bury something bigger. Ron stepped closer, voice trembling. But that's not the worst part. Keanu tensed. What now? Ron closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with a mix of dread and urgency. Someone leaked a rumor to the press. Sandra stepped back. What rumor? Ron hesitated. Then, with a heavy breath, he finally spoke. That you two are secretly together, and that your relationship is causing chaos on the set. Sandra's heart cracked. Keanu felt something inside him tighten painfully. And Ron finished quietly. The paparazzi are already outside the studio gates. For a moment, no one spoke. No one breathed. The world had suddenly shifted beneath their feet. Keanu reached for Sandra's hand, slow and gentle, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. She held on. Hard. And she whispered, What do we do now? Keanu took a deep breath. Then he said the words that would change everything. We tell the truth, all of it, and we stay honest, because honesty is the only thing they can't twist or steal. Sandra swallowed hard. And what is our truth? Keanu looked into her eyes. Warm, steady, Fearful, brave, that we care about each other, he whispered, and we won't let anyone use that against us. Sandra nodded slowly, tears glistening. Together. He squeezed her hand. Together. Ron exhaled, shoulders finally relaxing not in relief, but in trust. Then let's face them. They walked toward the exit as voices rose outside, press cameras clicking, lights flashing. The storm was waiting, but so were they. Keanu glanced at Sandra. Sandra glanced at Keanu. And in that small moment, before the doors opened and the world rushed in, they shared a quiet understanding. Whatever happened next, they would not let fear or rumors or threats break the respect, kindness, and resilience that had grown between them. And they stepped forward, side by side, into the light.